abroad through countless speeches, writing, and good counsel. Tonight, Esley will talk about the architecture of Oscar Niemeyer, 1907 to 2012, the great Brazilian architect and one of the key figures in the development of modern architecture. Best known for his design of civic buildings for Brasilia, the planned city which became Brazil's capital in 1960, he also collaborated with other architects on the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. And now, please welcome Esley Hamilton as he presents the architecture of Oscar Niemeyer. Esley?
Thank you very much, John. I always feel embarrassed because of all the things that you say about me that I'm very grateful. I want to point out the building that's on the title slide. This is an auditorium and cultural center that was built for a suburb of Brazil, of Rio de Janeiro, and it was completed in 2007. Oscar Niemeyer was born in 1907, and he lived another 4 years after this, dying in 2012 at the age of 104. So he had one of the longest careers of any architect, and he was working almost up to the end and still very creative. Now, my screen, oh, here we go. This slide shows him in about at the age of 12, about 1919, in middle age around the 1950s, and then close to his end of his career. And you can see behind him in the color picture that one of the drawings that he was famous for, which are recreated in many of his buildings. His original complete name, you see here, Oscar Ribeiro de Almeida Niemeyer Suarez Filho. Filho means he was junior. His father had the same name, and he probably should have been called by the usual standards of Brazil, Oscar de Almeida Suarez, but people seem to like his German name. His great-grandfather on his father's side had come from Germany, and you often find Middle European names that have gone on for quite a few generations in Brazil. He started school at this building, the School of Fine Arts in downtown Rio de Janeiro. And this building is still standing today, as now it's the National Museum of Rio. And the building to the left is the Municipal Theater, an incredible Beaux-Arts confection that is also still standing. Now it's hard to see these buildings though, because there are large trees in front of them, which in this picture look like have just been planted. After his graduation, he joined a group of other brilliant architects in a kind of a team effort, although there were quite a few designers in the group, and each person was a lead person. And the one who's best known is Lucio Costa, whom you see on the right here, and who also had a long life. He was the oldest by just a few years. And but the person on the left is also very important, Alfonso Redi. His name comes from England, actually, but in Brazilian Portuguese, his last name is pronounced Egi, which is, you would never guess as an American, but he was also a brilliant architect, but you can see from the dates that he died right at the height of the mid-century modern movement. And so he's not as well known as Niemeyer. Niemeyer, of course, went on to be one of the greatest architects of his era. He won the Pritzker Prize in 1988, and I was interested to see that the architecture critic of the New York Times, Ada Louise Huxtable, was the person who awarded it to him. And among Brazilians, he was there was a national poll about 10 years ago, who are the greatest Brazilians? He was the only architect in the top 100, and he ranked in the top 12. So he really is a national major figure. And of all the really important architects of the mid-century movement, he's the only one who has almost no presence in the United States. He only was able to complete one house in Santa Monica, California, and he wasn't able to supervise the construction of that. So I think it's especially important to look at his work, particularly in Brazil, but also in many other parts of the world because of his influence. Two of the other people in this team should be mentioned, even though they weren't primarily architects. Roberto Burle Marx was primarily a landscape architect, or at least that's how he's remembered. He thought of himself as primarily a painter, and many of his site plans look more like abstract paintings. And he also is very important because he really introduced the whole range of Brazilian plant materials into worldwide landscape design. Before that, they had been very little known. Candido Portinari is probably the least known of this team, but he was primarily also an artist and painter, but he designed many of the azulejos, the tile murals that feature in so many of Lucio Costa's and Oscar Niemeyer's buildings. The building that probably brought them to international attention first was the building they designed for the New York World's Fair of 1939 and 40. And in this view, you can see that the Brazilian building is the building with the low lines. The building that's kind of looming over it to the right was the French pavilion. And they deliberately designed this building to be as airy as possible and to create the greatest contrast with the French building, which tended to be a little bit more in the now outgoing Art Deco style. This still has the Getty Images label on it, but it's the only color picture I could find. You entered the building by going up this ramp, which you see here on the left also. And when you get to the top of the ramp, you enter the exhibition galleries from the balcony, and the balcony has this curving line, which of course is characteristic of Niemeyer's work. On the inside of the U-shaped building was a garden designed by Burle Marx, and you can see the kind of amoeba-shaped pool here, the lily pond, which is a characteristic form that goes through all his work, through his entire career. And also, I think the elevation of this interior courtyard view is really significant because it was the first modern design like this that most Americans had seen, with the structural supports on the outside and the glass set back, creating a two-layered effect. And as you look through the building, you can really see 3 or 4 layers because you see the balconies on the inside also. Another building that was important to them that was completed right about the same time was this building, originally called the Ministry for Education and Health. It was part of a complex of government ministries that were built on some land that had just been cleared in the downtown part of Rio de Janeiro. Rio was originally very, very hilly, but over the centuries, gradually those hills were removed and creating more flat land to build on. And this land had been cleared just before the Great Depression, and they were just getting able to start building on it. I wanted to show you this picture on the left as it looked when it was first built, with all the cars and very little greenery. But now Burle Marx's plants have come into their own. And also, if you look to the left of this building, you can see a typical example of the other office buildings, which were just grids of small windows and that filled the whole block and had rather dark courtyards on the inside. So Costa decided to invite Le Corbusier to visit Rio de Janeiro, and he accepted their invitation and came in 1935 when they were first talking about this. He didn't like the location and wanted to move it to another part of town, but they couldn't do that. But you can see many features that are characteristic of Le Corbusier's work, particularly the Swiss pavilion in the Cité Universitaire in Paris that had been built earlier. But this is a much larger building. Another thing that I want to emphasize about this building is that it had two sides which were different from each other. And this is something that's true of many of the early high-rise buildings. For example, right here in St. Louis, Harris Armstrong's Magic Chef building had two contrasting elevations. The idea of every elevation should be the same was kind of a shortcut for people who didn't want to have to worry about the various ecological impacts of the building. But in this case, this facade here faces north. And remember, in the southern hemisphere, the sun is coming from the north. The south side of the building is the shady side. So at Corbusier's suggestion, the team here decided to put these screens across the windows. And originally, the idea was that they would all be set in the same pattern at all times. But gradually over the years, they have altered depending on what is behind those windows. And because I think probably Niemeyer was foresighted enough to paint the underside of the screens blue, you have this beautiful kind of abstracted pattern. The other side of the building is all glass, and this has to be one of the first realized examples of an all glass facade. You see, even the spandrels are glass, only the window frames are not. And you can also get a better view here of the pilotti, which was one of Corbusier's ideas to have the building standing off the ground. But this one is particularly effective because these columns are nearly 40 feet high, 10 meters high. And so that eliminates the effect of a wind tunnel that you often get in openings through tall buildings like this. And it also makes it much more monumental in appearance. Another thing that that Corbusier suggested was that they use the local tradition of blue and white tiles to create murals on the sides of the building. And this is where Portinari came in. And so this is the inside entrance wall, but on the outside, there's another mural, and there's several in other parts of the building. If you look at these from a distance, they look abstract, but here are some details. And you can see they're all created from images from the sea. And the lower left-hand one has some scaffolding in front of it, but you can still see the starfish ideas. And also notice that the tiles themselves are not always square in form. Some of them have wavy edges. The main entrance reception rooms were one floor above the pilotti, and this is the staircase that you could use. Of course, there were also elevators, and this is terrazzo, which was a material that was used frequently there. And this is the secretary's desk with a mural, which is not there right now, although that building is currently under restoration. So when I was there with the Docomomo, the Mid-Century Modern international group that organized this tour, we were able to go in a hard hat tour of the repairs that were being made. And at the entrance, there was a whole area of these desks that were being piled up to be refinished. And these were designed by Niemeyer. He frequently designed all the furnishings for his buildings, but as I'll show you later, he didn't start making the designs for general sale to the public until much later. The big reception room for the culture department was under the lower wing in the back of the building. And this sculptor, Celso de Menezes, created the sculpture here and also several of the sculptures in the outdoor garden, which were rather shocking to people at the time. They were used to allegorical nudes, but not people that just looked like they were lounging. Here's the roof garden designed by Burle Marx, and the detailed picture here shows the outdoor statue that is still in its original location. In 1948, this building finally opened in 1942. The Museum of Modern Art had an exhibition, Brazil Builds, and they created this model of the Ministry of Education and Health for that exhibition, and it still is part of the Museum of Modern Art's permanent collection. In this, you can see the rooftop moldings, which are similar to the ones you see in some of Corbusier's houses around Paris. But this was particularly important here because the ventilation equipment would otherwise have been rather glaring there. And there were quite a few points around this building where you could see the roof. So another building that Niemeyer did right at the same time in the 1930s was, of all things, a tourist hotel for the town of Ouro Preto, which is a World Heritage Site today. It was the center of gold and silver mining in the 18th century and has the richest collection of 18th century Portuguese Baroque architecture. This, I think, gave him good credentials for being able to design buildings that were modern, but still consistent with the character of historic settings. You can see this long two-story building is really almost the same massing as the convent at the top of the hill in this view. And here's a detail, again, with walls set behind the glass, set somewhat behind the structural framework of the building, and another ramp leading up to the second floor where the primary dining room is located. Even more important in putting Niemeyer on the map internationally than these two buildings was a group of 4 buildings that he designed for the city of Belo Horizonte. Belo Horizonte was a new town that was built originally in 1893. So unlike most Brazilian and Portuguese colonial towns, it actually had a kind of rational plan, which that was considered very unusual at the time. And eventually it supplanted Ouro Preto as the capital of the state of Minas Gerais. But Pampulha was a new suburb for Belo Horizonte, built around this new artificial lake. And the person who commissioned it was the mayor, Juscelino Kubitschek. Kubitschek, of course, played a major role in Niemeyer's later life because first he became a governor of the state of Minas Gerais, and then he became president of the country. And it was his idea to build the new interior capital at Brasilia. So in this drawing by Niemeyer, you can see the 4 major buildings, and this orientation of this drawing corresponds to the left half of the photograph above. The church with the 4 arched roof lines is on the peninsula, the first peninsula, and the second building, which is now a museum, is facing a little bit over the hill that's jutting out into the middle of the lake. And then to the right on the main shore is the what was originally supposed to be a tennis club, but it's primarily a bathing club now. And then the circular building was a dance hall. So these buildings all were influential in their own right, but they really created a wonderful movement for people to build other buildings and move into the Pampulha district, which is now still one of the most fashionable districts in Belo Horizonte. Here's the dance hall, a circular building which has the dance floor raised like a professional ballet floor. And here's the little curvilinear roof line overlooking the lake. This is the so-called casino. Keep in mind that in places like Newport, Rhode Island, we had buildings that were also called casinos, but that didn't mean they were for gambling. It was a place for playing, really, entertainment, a little bit like a country club, but in town. And so that's what this building was originally. Now it has an auditorium, which is the semicircular space closest to the camera here. And the other rooms are used as a museum of the history of Pampulha. And here's the circular room with the glass floor, which must have been wonderful when that was being used for a restaurant and dancing. And this is the side of the building where you enter for the museum, still with the original sculpture that Niemeyer placed there. And this is a staircase, which is an early example of his interest in designing staircases that seem to be flying. In this case, the vertical shafts that you see on the left, which look like a window, are actually holding up the staircase. And the most famous building of the group of 4 was the church, which was dedicated to St. Francis of Assisi. And here's the picture of it under construction. It was a concrete construction on the, and you could see the formwork sticking out at the left side. But what's so interesting is they used that formwork then to create the ceilings of the interiors. And here's the way it looks now, finished. And notice the kind of streamlined design of the piers with the asymmetrical roof line at the entrance. And through the window, you can also see another curvilinear staircase going up to the organ loft. This is the loft. And this is, as you come into the building and then looking the other direction, this is the full-size mural. And notice the tile coverings of the pulpit. Some of this was done by the man he had been working with before, but some of it was designed by newer collaborators. And it took until the 1950s to get the bishop of this district to dedicate this because he didn't like that dog sitting in the picture to the left of St. Francis's feet. So they had to wait till he left office before they could consecrate the chapel, but they continued to use it. It was really the tiles on the back of the church that were the thing that was most frequently copied in the architectural press. And it shows several different scenes of St. Francis's life. Here on the left, he's talking to the birds, which is a famous story. And on the right, he's defeating the devil, who's looking very strange at the bottom of the picture there. And notice how in both cases, the tiles also form a pattern with fish on the left and the flying birds on the right. This is the swimming club, and notice it has this butterfly roof line. This is the interior of it, right at the crease in the roof line, looking out toward the lake. A few years later, Niemeyer used that same idea of the butterfly roof for a house that he designed for Kubitschek and his wife, and this was landscaped by Marx also. And you can see here, this picture at the top is not an original picture, but it shows you that they have refreshed the landscaping to the original plan several times in the building's history. Because of this publicity, I think, that Niemeyer was getting, he was invited to participate in the committee that designed the United Nations headquarters along First Avenue in New York City. And this site was donated to the United Nations by John D. Rockefeller Jr. and his son Nelson, who later was governor of New York and vice president of the United States, was very interested in Latin American culture in general and also in architecture. And so he worked very closely to see that this was realized according to their plans. It was Le Corbusier, who always kind of dominated these committees, who had the idea of separating the administrative tower from the meeting space, which is the domed building in the center of this view. But it was Niemeyer who said, let's not scatter these buildings all over this fabulously valuable site, but let's cluster them so that we also have a garden. And the garden, even today, remains one of the major features of this complex. So we can credit him with that. Of course, the person who executed the concept plans was Wallace Harrison, and both Niemeyer and Le Corbusier were not happy with his decisions in many details, but I think in general this remains one of the great buildings of the time, especially when you look at the dates of it. It was very early for this kind of a glass building, and you can see that the Secretariat, the office building, has the same feature as the Ministry of Education and Health in that the side walls are blank. Because of those two buildings, Niemeyer had quite a few commissions for other tall buildings in the next few years. He continued to design for Kubitschek. This was actually a publicly supported housing project in Belo Horizonte, built by the municipality. And today it's called the JK buildings after Juscelino Kubitschek's initials. But the building that really was the most surprising and different from most other high-rise residential buildings being designed at that period was the Copan complex, the Edificio Copan, which was, I want to say 38 stories high and had several thousand residences in it. And it's also built on a curve. The picture on the left shows it when it reached its 100th anniversary. I mean, it's Niemeyer's 100th birthday in 2007. That's why the 100 is on the side of the building. One of the things that made it unusual is it was designed kind of like the dormitories at Oxford and Cambridge. There are 8 different elevator systems here, and each system opens only to 2 units on each floor. So you almost have a private entrance to your apartment building and your apartment residence, and each residence goes the whole way through the building from front to back. And of course, this was very important because None of these buildings was air conditioned until much later. I think in the 70s is when he started to put air conditioning in buildings. So the cross ventilation was very important. And the overhangs were also important to control the light. This was a mural in the lobby of the building, and you can see in the gray in the back, that represents the Copan building. And in the foreground is one of Niemeyer's sketches of what he originally intended the complex to look like. And here are some views from inside one of the units. On the left, you're looking at the balconies that are on what would be the south side of the building, and at the top right is the view through those long fins, and they're really not safe to walk out on, and also they're not really tall enough to walk out on, but they're still maintained pretty well. And on the bottom right, you can see there where one of the walls has been cut back. One of the problems always with concrete construction is there's no possibility of rewiring the building except on the outside of the structural elements. And you can see the metal electrical outlet there above the stove. The Libertad Apartments is now also called Kubitschek Apartments in Belo Horizonte. And in these views, you're looking at the side of it. It really is even larger than the Copan complex in Sao Paulo. Another building in Sao Paulo that is not quite so curvilinear, but still very interesting, also has the units going the whole way through. And here is a close-up of those screens that are alternating. And here's a view in one of the units. One of his most influential residential buildings was designed in Berlin as part of an international festival of new architecture, new residential architecture that was worked out by the Berlin municipal government. The Hansa-Viertel district of Berlin had been almost totally obliterated by bombing during World War II. And so they cleared about half of that site and invited several architects, something like 50 architects, to come and design buildings for that site. And he was one of them. The buildings that Corbusier designed are one of his Unité versions, but this one was probably a little bit more influential. Let's see, there were 57 architects and they built 55 different apartment buildings. So it took 2 or 3 years to build these buildings. And then when they were all finished in 1957 is when there was all this international publicity about it. And this was designed the same way as the Copan building with 6 elevator stacks and the semi-private entrances for the apartments. The German architectural critics criticized his V-shaped pilotis because they said that that was just an example of an artistic effort on his part, and it wasn't part of the rational construction of the building. So this, I think, epitomizes in a nutshell the problem that that Niemeyer had with his very progressive and expressionistic approach to architecture and the kind of puritanical ideas that people like Gropius and some of the other traditional modernists had. This is, of course, showing it under construction. That exhibition that I mentioned in the Museum of Modern Art in 1948 also included these elements here. they're a model for a beach house by Burton and Emily Tremaine that was supposed to be built right facing the Pacific Ocean near Montecito, California. And it has all of his kind of signature elements as of this point. And the model in the lower left is also another thing that's part of the Museum of Modern Art's permanent collection. The plan on the right is an example of Marx's work, and you can see how expressive it is and how you really almost have to know what he's talking about in order to even be able to read it. But you can see the hourglass shaped element is the swimming pool, which you can also see in the model at the top. And this, the model at the top is a modern model that's built directly on the a replica of the Marx drawing. The most influential house that Niemeyer designed was a house for himself in the suburbs of Rio de Janeiro. And this is still standing, although it's the family has been trying to renovate it for some time, and so there's no water in the pool now, and there are other problems. It also is much more shady than it was originally. When he first built this, you could see from this hillside down to the Atlantic, and you could also see the tops of the hills surrounding, but now you can just barely see them through the trees. But this building, I think, should really be ranked in the same category as the glass houses of Philip Johnson and Mies van der Rohe, because it is almost all glass. And the solutions that Niemeyer came up with are unique. Notice here that between the swimming pool and the house is a huge rock. And here's another view of it with the curvilinear roof line. And also notice the curvilinear glass, which was in huge sheets and must have been very difficult to get up the side of this hill here. This plan is good because the dotted line shows you the roof line, which is only tangentially related to the shape of the house underneath it. And the big gray block in the center is the rock. So this is reminiscent to many people of the Falling Water House of Frank Lloyd Wright, which has a rock coming up through the floor of the living room also. And this photo here shows Niemeyer and his wife, Anna Maria, on the inside of the house in front of the rock, and the staircase is just to the left. And here's a view showing Niemeyer looking down the stairs. And in this view, Anna Maria has her grandson sitting on the sofa there with her. So his solution to privacy in a glass house was to put some of the rooms below. And this was actually very functional because he created then an extension for the terrace that the pool is on that extends beyond where the ground would otherwise go. And in this section, you can see the bedrooms and this lower level of the house that was an essential part of their living area. The work, as I mentioned before, with Burle Marx continued. For Sao Paulo, Burle Marx and Niemeyer designed a large public park, which was also intended to be kind of a trade fair. So it has several very large exhibition buildings in it, but it's landscaped and designed in such a way that the buildings don't dominate the landscape. And it was, they created quite a few bodies of water here also, because this was essentially an unbuildable marsh before they started. Most of Sao Paulo is on hills. And now this park is even more important because the city is about 21 million people. And when you're in the center of the city, there are high-rise apartment buildings in every direction as far as you can see. This is only about 400 acres, which is half the size of Tower Grove Park. But the most important thing is this canopy, which is like a ribbon that runs through the whole site. And they call it a marquee, like the marquee of a theater. And uh, the marquee is important, was more important then because their trees were all young and there was very little shade. And of course, Rio is and Sao Paulo both are kind of subtropical. They never get really cold, and they can get very warm and very humid. So these marquees have almost turned into street markets. As you can see, there are just a few vendors here, but on other days they can be quite crowded. And also it's one of the greatest skateboard places you can imagine. Here's another vendor. So when Juscelino Kubitschek became president of Brazil, he decided to move the capital, and he knew that he had to get the government moved into the buildings before he left office 4 years later, or the next administration probably would drop the thing. And that was typical of the history of Brazil, of very little follow through from one administration to the other. So he got this group of people together under the leadership of Lucio Costa, whom you see here in a cutout, life-size cutout. And this is a large version on the right of his plan, which is often said to look like an airplane, but he thought of it as looking like a bird because the wings of the thing are kind of curving instead of straight. But for many years, I think many people had the wrong impression of how this was designed in relation to the topography and the surroundings, because it looks like it's going north and south. But if you look over at the lower right corner, you can see that north is off at an angle. And here's a recent satellite view, which I've tried to orient so that north is at the top. And you can see the two wings are, one is going to the north and the other is going to the south. And that's the way all the streets are numbered also. To north, as you're going up from the lake, the north is to the right and south is to the left. This lake had already been surveyed back in the 1920s in a previous proposal to turn this site into a city. And so they were able to start with that shoreline as a basis for the whole plan. And so many parts of the city have views of water, which is good because otherwise the land is pretty flat. The center body of the let me go back here. The center body is where the administration and all the civic buildings are located. And the peninsula is for some prestigious things, although there are also a few of the original temporary settlements that the workers lived in that are now kind of desirable places for the permanent residents to live. And right on the point, at the farthest point where it's green, that is the president's residence. And that was the first building that was completed. This is called wait a minute. This is called the Alvorada Palace, which has to do with sunrise. And this was ready to move in 1958 already. And this colonnade was at the time was considered very remarkable. And here's a picture of Kubitschek, the first person to live in this house. And you can see how the porch across the front is actually at a higher level with the water from the pools going partly under the porch. To one side of the palace is this kind of a snail shell shaped chapel. And this was the idea of Mrs. Kubitschek, who was a very religious person. And Niemeyer later built this same design in 2 other locations because he liked it so much. The second building was a hotel, which was for all the people who were coming back and forth in this big construction project. And unfortunately, the hotel caught fire and burned down in 1978, and it was only restored in 2006. But here are people walking past the ruins of it, and here's what it looks like today. And notice here again, the 2 sides of the building are completely different approaches to design. And in the right hand picture, the bottom picture on the left hand, you can see one of those tile walls. And his man who had been designing most of the walls originally, Portinari, had dropped out because of health problems. And so he turned to a new person named Athos Bulcon, B-U-L-C-A-O, Athos Bulcon. And this enormous mural is in the ballroom of the lower level of the hotel. And the upper picture is just one of the floors showing how the window of the north windows are actually opening into the corridor, and the rooms have private balconies on the other side. The third building was this little chapel that was also Mrs. Kubitschek's idea because she didn't want people to move into these new high-rise apartment buildings that were intended to be built and have nowhere to go to church. And so this 3-sided building was put up, and it still is one of the most popular buildings in the city. This is what it looks like today. And this is one of Niemeyer's drawings that shows the whole profile of the building. And this is another of Athos Bulcon's murals with the descending dove, the symbol of the Holy Spirit. This is an incredible photograph that I found, I must say, that it's taken from one of the insurance and banking office buildings in the business district of Brasilia, looking down the main mall toward the twin towers of the legislative building. And the 2 buildings closest to us along the mall are part of the cultural center, which was one of Niemeyer's last projects. And then you have the cathedral, you have all the kind of mini secretariat buildings, which are for the ministries. And to behind those ministries are annexes because they all have overflowed their original space. And you can see how the lake is winding around this central complex so that it kind of modifies and modulates the view in almost every direction. Here's a more distant view, and this shows that the real center of the town in terms of traffic is the bus station, which has 2 levels of roads going around it. And there are also 2 shopping centers. The one on the left is the upscale one, and the one on the right is the downscale one, which they advised this might not be a good one to go to in the evening. I can't imagine what would have happened there. But anyway, then you can see how the business district has actually grown pretty much. The legislative building is called the National Congress Building. And right behind it is a large open plaza, which is called the Plaza of the 3 Powers. And the Congress is 1, the president is the 2nd, and the Supreme Court is the 3rd. And you can see in this view how the building is actually much lower than the surrounding land. And Lucio Costa actually graded this hole. It's not a natural depression, but he wanted this building not to be so dominant. And it has the 2 dome-like things. One is like a sailor's hat. I always think that's the lower chamber, and the actual dome, the saucer dome, is the Senate. and here's a reflection. Notice that there's a ramp that goes the whole way up to the roof, and the roof is entirely paved in marble because it was intended that that would be a public promenade. But of course, nowadays with modern security, that's not permitted. But they were in the process of repaving that 2 years ago. As you walk into the building, you're on the lower level, and you have to go up 2 levels to the actual Congress halls, but each level has its own public spaces. And this is the lowest level with a tapestry by Burle Marx. And the 3rd level, this is actually the concourse between the 2 houses, has another Athos Vulcan abstract tile mural. And notice that the area carpet, the circular carpet with the furnishings very carefully placed in a formal arrangement that that Niemeyer designed and gave instructions for. But this is how people actually use it, which I thought was very interesting. Human nature being what it is, people make the best use they can. So the fact that these furnishings are not screwed into the floor is very helpful to them. This is the lower house, and notice the screensaver on the 2 large walls is a drawing by Niemeyer showing the profile of this the sailor's hat dome-like thing. And then this is the Senate chamber, and in this case, the inside of the dome has gold scales which are on thin wires, so there any kind of movement of the air causes those to slightly shimmer. So this is one of the most spectacular visual experiences you can imagine, to have all these gold shimmering elements with the light dancing over them. The Palazzo de Planalto is the president's office, and here the colonnade has the curved columns turned at right angles to the way they are in the Palace of the Alvarado. And the Planalto refers to this region of Brazil. It's a high plain which has kind of weather a little bit like western Nebraska at times, very dry and a lot of wind, but never as cold as western Nebraska. Here's Niemeyer looking at a model of this, the Palace of Planalto. And this is an interesting feature. To get to the balcony, you can go into a staircase in this solid cylinder and then walk across that walkway. And notice that the walkway has no railings, and that was true of many of the buildings in this complex. And really, anytime that Niemeyer could get away with it, he did not put handrails. This is the Supreme Court building, which again has a different kind of colonnade, and the sculpture of Justice was designed specifically for this site. The Ministry of Justice is actually on the opposite side of the mall from the Supreme Court building, but it's one of the most remarkable designs because all of these projecting kind of dish-like things are fountains, and it's hard to see in this view, but in this view you can see very clearly the water that's pouring off of those. And the whole building is surrounded by this moat, except for the few walkways. And we actually saw little rowboats that were moored in various places where the gardeners used those to row out to these islands. Right across, here's the center part of the mall with the avenue of ministries. And notice that they're kind of pockmarked because now they have air conditioners in many of the windows, but they're not inserted in a uniform pattern. And you can see that in this view that shows the 27 state flags in the building at the opposite side, you can see the air conditioners are in the same part of the windows, but not matched up in any way. And that's one of the things that they're wanting to work on now, especially because of global warming. This is the opposite building of the Justice Department building, which is called the Itamaraty Palace. It's a little bit like we call the State Department in Washington, D.C., Foggy Bottom. Itamaraty was the location in Rio of the former offices of the foreign ministry. And so they use that same name here in Brasilia. And this building is one of the best maintained because this is where they entertain all the diplomats from around the world who visit Brasilia. And this shows its relation to the Congress building. This is probably the most famous feature of it, the staircase that goes from the main lobby up to the level where the dining and meeting rooms are held. No railing, as you can see, and people are actually using it. And at the top level, there's a walkway that goes the whole way around the building. And then in the center of the top floor is another enclosed garden. And there are many different sizes and shapes of meeting rooms and entertainment rooms in this level. In this case, this very small room was designed to house this 18th century ceiling that was moved from, I think, from Ouro Prato here. And in this very large dining room, which has these incongruous Chippendale chairs, the mural is a tapestry by Burle Marx. It was actually a series of separate tapestries, but they were eventually sewn together, and they work very well here. The cathedral is one of the most famous buildings of Brasilia. It's called the Metropolitan Cathedral, or Our Lady of Aparecida. And the bell tower is to the right there. The engineer, Joaquim Cardozo, worked with Niemeyer on most things for all of these concrete vaults and so on, but this is the one that he got the most credit for. This is the interior. It's about 70 meters in diameter, and there's 16 columns around the center. Originally, this had no stained glass in it, and the light was almost blinding. And but since the glass has been installed, which was in 1990, it's generally speaking, the light is very effective and not too bright. And notice in the hanging in midair are two angels, which was part of the original design also. This is the National Theater, and it's built like a pyramid. And on the inside, the lobby is like a huge greenhouse on 2 levels. The Army headquarters is not on the main concourse, but a little bit to one side and several miles away from the ministries. But the building on the right is a theater, which was built a few years later. But the most important thing is this plaza, which has a memorial to the Duke of Caxias, which was Brazil was a empire headed by a king until 1888. And so he gave out titles like you would in a European monarchy. And Brazil was the only country in Latin America that had that, except for the few years in Mexico. And this is, at least according to Niemeyer, the shaft is like the shaft of a sword, and the arched curvilinear piece is like the guard over your hand on the handle of the sword. And here's another view that gives you an idea of the scale of it. And this terrace looks out across the street on another large garden designed by Marx. And The buildings are all precast concrete. And this is the first time that any kind of traditional arcade has been used in Niemeyer's work, as far as I am familiar. So it was a little bit of a shock to see this. Going back to the Plaza of the Three Powers, there are two additional buildings here that Niemeyer designed. One is this long building that is incredible cantilever, which is a museum to the construction of Brasilia. And that was planned for from the very beginning, but it eventually became a kind of a memorial to Kubitschek, and it has this bust of Kubitschek on the inner side of it. And most of the museum is below the plaza. And then just to one side of the plaza is this building, which was a memorial to a later president, Tancredo Neves, who died in a plane crash unexpectedly. And so this was kind of a tribute to him, and then by extension to all the martyrs who fought for liberty in Brazil, going back to the 17th century when the first slave uprising took place. And you can see this very strange window at one end of the building, and this is what it looks like from the inside. Kubitschek himself died unexpectedly. He was killed and his wife also in an automobile accident in 1976. And this was during the time that the military government was in power in Brazil, and many people thought that this accident was no accident. So there was an enormous tomb built for him right on the axis of the mall in 1980. With this unusual kind of comma-shaped tower with a statue by a woman sculptor, Honoria Picanha. And then also on the mall is this very recent tower, which was one of the last buildings that Niemeyer designed. This is for a digital TV, of all things. And then the last buildings he built in were just finished a year when he was 99 years old. The dome building is the National Museum, and the arcaded building to the right is the National Library. And the buildings behind there are not by Niemeyer, but they're very striking, as you can see. This is one of my favorite photographs of all Niemeyer's buildings. Somebody walking up the ramp to go into the National Museum. And this is the National Library and Archives with that unusual arcade, also all cantilevered out from, so it's hanging in midair. And this is a recent mural showing a kind of a mid-century modern map of Brasilia, with the paired towers in the center, and you can see the cathedral, of course, and the towers, the apartment buildings with their pilotti in red and green. Because of the takeover of the coup d'etat, which occurred in April of 1964, Niemeyer moved to France, and he didn't come back to the country until 1980. And I believe in 85 is when they finally transitioned to an elected president again. So while he was in France, he started making furniture for sale, and this stuff is still available. But this chaise longue is probably his most famous piece. This is the house he designed in Santa Monica, and he sent the drawings in '63, but because of the coup, he was never able to visit because the military wouldn't give him a visa unless he wanted to leave the country permanently. He was had been a communist and an active member of the Communist Party his whole life, so it was not a surprise to anybody. that he was. But that also was one of the reasons why not only could he not get a visa to leave the country, but he couldn't get a visa to come to the United States because, remember, we still had the effects of McCarthyism going strong here during that time. It looks like a very large pergola, except that the rafters that are going across are actually concrete. And here is the interior with this very large center living and dining area. So amazingly, his career was probably even more active from his base in Paris than it had been in Rio. And this is one of the most unusual things he designed, a permanent fair for like we would have at the convention center down here in better times. He designed a whole bunch of exhibition halls and parks to lead people from one building to the other. And here is this concrete arch completed in 1962, which looks like he was at least a little bit inspired by Eros Arden. You can see there's a pyramid there to the right also in the garden. And here's another view across the central area. This is in Tripoli, Lebanon, which is not the capital city, but it's a little bit farther north from Beirut. And this is one of his most endangered complexes now. There have been several articles about how it needs work. It hasn't actually been, nobody's planning to tear it down, but it's just they have stopped maintaining it because of the very poor economic conditions in Lebanon. In Paris itself, he designed this building for the headquarters of the French Communist Party in 1965. And it's very much inspired by the UNESCO headquarters by Marcel Breuer that had been built in Paris just a few years before. And like the UNESCO building, it's on one of the major intersections and is designed to face toward that. But also it has a large part of its meeting rooms under this garden. And here's the plan. The dome that we saw is number 7 in this plan. And you can see there are many staircases and ramps and other features of that interior. And this has just recently been restored. And this is probably the most spectacular dome he designed because it's not just overhead, but it's the ceiling and the walls, just glittering silver. Another outstanding building during this period was the headquarters for Mondadori, which is a publishing company. And it looks at first glance like a building from Brasilia designed when he had been drinking too much, but because the spacing between the arches doesn't seem to repeat at all as you look down that row of arches. But it definitely created a signature identifier for this very large publishing company. This was during the early years of the independence of Algeria. Remember, Charles de Gaulle had pulled France out of Algeria, and Ouari Boumediene, who had been the head of the liberation forces, was able to work with Niemeyer on several projects. Unfortunately, several of them were started but not finished. But this is in the town of Constantine, he designed an entire university campus with these exceptionally long, low buildings, and the one tower, and then this kind of signature building in the center, which is an auditorium. And if you look in the far upper right, you see that the building in the background has a whole row of portholes running across the wall. And that's what's represented in the view on the left. This is just one of the lecture rooms. Outside Paris, he designed a new headquarters for the labor unions, which would have been like the AFL-CIO in Washington, D.C. And here you can see how his imagination is really carrying him away with strange shapes to put auditoriums and theaters into. You see how it comes up to a point, and then on the upper left, you can see what it looks like from the inside near the top of that point, going down to the actual stage. And here's another similar cultural center. This one is at the port city of Le Havre, where Le Havre was seriously bombed in World War II, but even before the war, it had been a center for concrete construction. And this was called the Vulcan, or the Volcano, Le Vulcan, the cultural center. And this also has recently been restored. The thing that looks like a large hat is actually the auditorium. And here's a cutaway drawing showing how it fits into that space. You can see there's a lot of space in there that is really just the flies for theatrical productions. Another incredible arena, the cupola of Algiers, is in Algeria. And to me, this looks like a hot water bottle, and especially notice the door in the lower left picture. Even the door is round, like the nozzle of a hot water bottle that you would fill. Another large commercial building in Italy for Fata in 1975 has more of these enormous cantilevers. This whole huge concrete thing is supported on these two posts there. And again, much of it is underground, as you can see in the picture on the right. Toward the end of his time away from Brazil, he designed a casino on the island of Madeira and a whole resort complex there. But when he came back to Brazil, he designed two samba arenas, which I can't think of a better way for him to welcome himself back into the culture of Brazil. During the period that we've just passed, the Mardi Gras period, samba clubs compete with each other for prizes, and there are many clubs. There's so many that there has to be a preliminary competition even to limit it to the number of people. And the competition is held at night, and it runs all night long. And so this is what the Sambadrome at Sao Paulo looked like originally, with a road going right past it. And later he was able to come back and complete the whole thing. And this is the one from, I believe this is the one from Rio. And this shows the second half of it being built in a very extreme foreshortening telephoto, a view of it while it was still under construction. And this is what it looked like on the night of the competition. There are bleachers, and then below that there are other seating arrangements, so that every part of these buildings is full of people looking out at the dancers. And the dancers start at one end, and they have to get to the other end in, I think they have 50 minutes. And it's not that easy because they have floats and all kinds of other things. Here it shows them, one of the groups coming up toward the end, where you have this three-sided canopy. So this is really one of the great experiences of Brazil. If you ever have an opportunity to schedule a visit during that samba period. Another big national monument he did during this period was called the Memorial to Latin America, also in Sao Paulo. And this was partly to reinforce Sao Paulo's position as one of the leading centers of trade in all of Latin America. And so it includes a library on the right, the thing that looks like a canister at the near the bottom in the center is actually an art gallery. There's another meeting hall behind the goalposts, so to speak, and then another office building on the left of this main road here. And then a couple of years after that, they thought that they could have something like the Organization of American States meet here. And so they established a secretariat and a larger meeting hall, which is that rolling roof and at the top of the picture for that complex. And it really has not worked as they had hoped, but these buildings are still in use. And as a symbol of the whole complex, Niemeyer designed this hand, the bleeding hand. And of course, the wound is the kind of abstracted geographical form of Latin America. And this is the passerelle, as they call it, the pedestrian overpass. And this is another one of these enormously cantilevered buildings supported from above in this case. Probably of his late work, Niemeyer's most frequently photographed building is the Museum of Contemporary Art, which is on the opposite side of Guanabara Bay from downtown Rio de Janeiro in the suburb of Niterói. But you can see it from downtown, and it's just a few minutes drive to get there. And this idea of building a large building on a stem was something that he had played with for a long time. This is actually a proposal he made for a similar building in Caracas, Venezuela, but that was never built. And so here's this again, and it's entered, like so many of the buildings, up a ramp. In this case, the ramp has got red carpet, and from the ramp, you can see downtown Niterói, which is almost as dense as downtown Rio these days. And then you notice that there are lots of windows in this. Most of the galleries are in the center core of the building because the windows have this spectacular 360-degree view of the bay. Here's Niemeyer in his 90s visiting the building. And on the right is the wall that that is closed off at night when the museum isn't open. And it's one of the most unusual things that I've seen in that way. It's glass with these bowed supports on the inside of the wall. Another theater that he designed was a late addition to the park in Sao Paulo, Ibirapuera Auditorium, which wasn't finished till 2005. And it looks like a wedge. The red piece that you see there opens directly onto the stage. So you can actually perform to an audience on the inside, or you can open that and perform for a much larger audience that's in the surrounding park. This also gives you a good idea of the air quality problems in Sao Paulo. Here's the entrance with the cantilevered marquee, and this is the lobby. And if you see the person standing over to the right, it gives you an idea of the scale. This is overall one huge red sculpture that covers the whole roof and walls of the lobby. This is in Ravello, rather, Italy. Ravello is on the north coast, north of Genoa. And this is one of the last buildings he did that I think is really an important example of his ability to work in a context. This shows the context of the building on this very steep hillside with all these traditional gardens and houses that he had to avoid. And so to make the building long enough or deep enough, he has it cantilevered out over the road that's on the lower level. And there's another smaller theater in the other building on the right side of this picture. And here's the terrace at night, and here's the inside. I'll just run through a handful of other projects here. In Curitiba, Brazil, this was a Niemeyer museum, You would never know the scale of this if you weren't seeing this at night, so that you can see the size of the chairs on the inside and the people walking around on 2 levels. Here's another complex in Aviles, which is on the north coast of Spain in the Asturias region. It's almost identical to the buildings that we looked at the very beginning, but it also has another building on a post here. And here's one, a much bigger building, the black building on a post with this very large ramp, almost as large as the building. This is on the easternmost point of Brazil, sticking out into the Atlantic Ocean, where the explorer Jean Pessoa first discovered or first landed on the Brazilian soil. And that was how Brazil was able to claim that, Portugal was able to claim Brazil instead of Spain claiming it. And this is where we started. The very last project he did, another theater and another complex of cultural buildings designed for Niterói. It's actually a little bit outside the center of Niterói, but on bus stops, and another great place for skateboarding. So I think that you can get an idea of the range of Niemeyer's work, and I encourage you to use the library's resources. They have some of the earliest publications about Niemeyer in the Stedman collection, and we also have some of the more recent lavishly illustrated examples of his work. So thank you all for coming very much.